There is an argument to be made that cats domesticated us. Not a metaphorical argument, not a joke. An actual, evidence-based, scientifically grounded argument that the relationship between cats and humans did not unfold the way domestication is supposed to unfold, with humans in control, selectively breeding animals toward desired traits through deliberate choice, but rather the other way around. That cats identified a resource-rich human niche, moved into it entirely on their own terms, shaped human behavior in ways that benefited cats, and have been running a highly successful long-term strategy ever since that has resulted in there being approximately 600 million domestic cats on Earth today, which is by any measure an extraordinary outcome for an animal that contributes essentially nothing to human subsistence, requires no training to deploy, and that, as a species, could not care less whether you specifically live or die. So let us look at the evidence. Let us actually trace the history of the human-cat relationship from its origins to the present and see who, at each stage, was really in charge. The conventional story of animal domestication goes like this. Humans identify a wild animal with useful traits. They capture individuals of that species. They breed them selectively for docility, usefulness, and behavioral compatibility with humans. Over generations, the animal changes, physically, behaviorally, neurologically, becoming something different from its wild ancestor, shaped by deliberate human choices into a domestic form optimized for human purposes. This is more or less how dogs were domesticated. Wolves that were less fearful of humans began associating with human camps, eating scraps, and providing the incidental benefits of alarm barking and tracking assistance. Humans began actively selecting for the traits they found useful: docility, sociability, specific working behaviors. Over thousands of years of this mutual process, wolves became dogs, an animal so thoroughly shaped by human selection that it can read human facial expressions, respond to human pointing gestures, and has literally co-evolved emotional attachment systems that parallel human ones. The dog is, in meaningful biological ways, a human-made animal. We built it, cats are not that. The domestic cat, Felis catus, is descended from the Near Eastern wildcat, Felis silvestris libica. And unlike the dog, which is so diverged from its wolf ancestor that they are considered separate species by most taxonomic frameworks, the domestic cat and the Near Eastern wildcat are genetically so similar that they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring without any difficulty. More than that, behavioral studies of feral domestic cats and wild Near Eastern wildcats find that their behavior is not dramatically different. The domestic cat is, relative to its wild ancestor, barely domesticated in any conventional sense. It is, biologically speaking, essentially a wild animal that has agreed, provisionally and entirely on its own terms, to live near humans under conditions that suit it. This is genuinely strange. Domestication is supposed to change animals. You are supposed to be able to look at a domestic animal and see the accumulated weight of 10,000 years of human selective pressure. And you can with dogs, with cattle, with sheep, with horses, with pigs. You can see it clearly in body size, coat color, facial structure, behavior, neurological architecture. Domestication leaves marks that are impossible to miss. With cats, what you see is a wild cat, wearing a collar in some cases, but fundamentally, unmistakably, a wild cat. The genetic and archaeological evidence tells us when and how this relationship began, and the when and how are both deeply suggestive of who was driving the process. The earliest evidence of cats and humans living in close proximity dates to roughly 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent region of the Near East. This timing is not a coincidence, and it is not random. 10,000 years ago is precisely when humans in this region were transitioning from nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agricultural communities. And settled agricultural communities did something that had never existed anywhere in the world before that moment. They created grain stores. Large, concentrated, reliable stores of grain are, from the perspective of a small rodent, paradise. Stable food supply, shelter, low predation pressure inside human settlements. Rats and mice flooded into the first agricultural villages in enormous numbers. And from the perspective of a small predatory cat that eats small rodents, a large stable concentration of small rodents is also paradise. The cats did not need to be invited. They did not need to be captured and bred. They simply followed the rodents into the human settlements, found the conditions highly favorable, and stayed. The humans found this arrangement acceptable. The cats were controlling the rodent population that was otherwise eating their grain stores and spreading disease. They were not aggressive toward humans by default. They were not large enough to pose a physical threat to adults. They were, from the human perspective, useful and non-threatening and somewhat interesting. So the humans tolerated them, possibly began deliberately encouraging them, possibly started providing supplementary food as the relationship developed beyond purely utilitarian terms. Notice what happened here. The cats made a decision, individually and collectively across the population through the accumulated effect of individual choices, to enter the human sphere. The humans did not go out and trap wildcats and begin a selective breeding program. The wildcats assessed the situation, determined it was in their interest, and self-selected into proximity with humans. The relationship began on feline initiative. The cats came to us, not us to them. The earliest confirmed archaeological evidence of this association comes from a burial site in Cyprus, dated to around 7,500 BCE. A cat had been deliberately buried alongside a human, placed in the grave with apparent care, in close proximity to the human remains. Cyprus is an island. Wild cats do not naturally occur in Cyprus. Cats cannot swim there, which means humans deliberately brought a cat, almost certainly a tamed or semi-tamed animal, to Cyprus on a boat at considerable effort and inconvenience to themselves. This is remarkable. It means that by 7,500 BCE, the human-cat relationship had already developed to the point where individual cats were being transported on boats, kept as companions, and buried with honors alongside their humans. That is not the beginning of a relationship. That is a relationship that has already been going on long enough to become emotionally significant and worth the considerable logistical effort of maritime transport. The relationship was already mature by the time we first find hard evidence of it. And then there is ancient Egypt. If you want to understand how thoroughly cats managed to insert themselves into the most powerful human civilization of their era, Egypt is the definitive case study. Cats in ancient Egypt were not merely tolerated, they were not merely appreciated, they were venerated. The goddess Bastet, one of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon, associated with protection, fertility, and the home, was depicted as a cat or as a woman with a cat's head. Killing a cat in ancient Egypt, even accidentally, was a crime that could be punished by death under Egyptian law. When a family cat died, the entire household went into formal mourning. Family members shaved their eyebrows as a sign of grief. Cats were mummified in enormous numbers. Archaeologists have found cat mummies in the hundreds of thousands, and were offered as religious dedications at temples dedicated to Bastet across the country. The scale of this is worth sitting with for a moment. Hundreds of thousands of mummified cats, a major protective goddess in the shape of a cat. The death penalty for killing one. This is an animal that arrived in Egypt as a practical pest controller, and within a few thousand years had achieved the status of a divine being protected by the full weight of state power and religious authority. If you were designing a long-term strategic plan for a species, getting yourself classified as sacred by the dominant civilization of your region is an objectively excellent move. You secure protection against harm. You secure reliable food. You secure the full enforcement capacity of an organized state against anyone who might harm you. It is, from a purely strategic perspective, one of the most successful non-military expansions in the history of organisms on this planet. And the cats did it not through any kind of collective planning. They are cats. They do not plan collectively, but through the cumulative effect of millions of individual interactions in which individual humans found individual cats compelling, beautiful, useful, and worthy of emotional investment. The mechanism by which cats achieve this emotional investment from humans is worth examining carefully because it is not accidental and it is not arbitrary. It is, if you look at it with the right framework, a sophisticated evolved system for extracting resources from humans. Cats have a suite of behavioral and physical features that exploit specific vulnerabilities in the human psychological system. Some of these are almost certainly evolved responses to the human environment rather than pre-existing wildcat traits, selected for over the thousands of years that cats have lived near humans because they were effective at eliciting human care and investment. The most visually obvious of these is the retention of juvenile physical features in adult cats. Large eyes relative to face size, rounded faces, small noses. These features exploit a deep neurological response in humans that is tuned to respond to infant features. The mechanism that makes babies appear cute and triggers caregiving behavior. Human brains are wired to find large eyes and rounded faces appealing and to want to take care of things that display them, because throughout human evolutionary history, responding to those features was highly adaptive. Cats have, through living near humans and being selected by humans who found certain cats more appealing than others, evolved to hijack this system in adults. Fluffy, big-eyed cats got fed and protected. Harsh-featured cats less so. Over thousands of generations, the population shifted toward the features that worked. The solicitation purr is another tool in the feline arsenal that is more sophisticated than it appears on the surface. Cats produce a specialized vocalization, a purr embedded within a cry, that they use specifically when soliciting food from humans. Research has found that humans rate this solicitation purr as more urgent and more difficult to ignore than a regular purr, and that the embedded cry component activates the same neural responses as an infant crying. Crucially, cats do not use this vocalization with other cats. They use it specifically with humans. It is a communication system that appears to have evolved within the context of the human-cat relationship for the purpose of producing a specific response in the human nervous system. It is, if we are being direct about it, a manipulation tool that evolved because it works. The meow tells a similar story. Adult wildcats do not meow at each other. Kittens meow at their mothers as a distress signal. Adult domestic cats meow at humans. The meow, in adult cats, is a vocalization retained from kittenhood and repurposed specifically as a human-directed communication tool because meowing at humans produces results and meowing at other cats produces nothing. The domestic cat has essentially developed a language for talking to humans that it does not use with members of its own species. It learned to speak human, not because it was trained to, but because speaking human was useful. The picture that emerges is of a species that has systematically retained and modified juvenile behaviors and deployed them specifically in the context of interacting with humans. Not through any conscious strategy, but through the relentless logic of natural selection operating on a population living in close proximity to a species that responds to those behaviors with food and protection. Cats that were better at triggering human caregiving responses survived and reproduced more successfully. Cats that were worse at it survived less well. Over 10,000 years, the population became very good at it. The spread of cats out of the Near East and across the world tracks human civilization with remarkable fidelity. Cats followed the grain trade. As agricultural commodities moved along trade routes, rodent populations followed the grain, and cats followed the rodents. Genetic studies of domestic cat populations around the world show that the genetic lineages of cats in any given region track the historical trade routes that connected that region to the ancient Near East. Cats in Europe carry Near Eastern genetics that arrived along the same routes that brought wheat and bronze. Cats in Asia carry genetics that track the Silk Road. Cats colonized the world by stowing away on human commerce. There is evidence that cats were deliberately brought on ships not as pets but as working animals. Mousers whose job was to protect grain cargoes from rodents that would otherwise devastate them. A ship with cats lost less cargo. Cats were ship's crew in a functional sense, and they traveled with human ships for thousands of years, arriving at every port that human maritime commerce reached. The global distribution of domestic cats today is partly a map of human trade routes over the past 5,000 years, marked in feline genetics. The relationship between cats and specific human subcultures adds another layer to the story. Cats have been associated with religious and spiritual practice in an unusual number of independent cultural contexts, not just Egypt, but also Norse mythology, where the goddess Freya rode a chariot pulled by giant cats, Japanese folklore, where the Maneki Neko beckons good fortune, and various Celtic and Southeast Asian spiritual traditions. The repeated association of cats with the supernatural across independent cultures is connected to specific features of cat behavior that humans in pre-scientific societies found genuinely uncanny. Cats are nocturnal predators with eyes that reflect light in the dark. In a world without electric light, encountering a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness that then resolved into a small domestic animal was an unsettling and memorable experience. Cats also have behavioral patterns that look, to human observers, like precognitive ability. Their tendency to detect vibrations and sounds before humans notice them. Their apparent sensitivity to environmental changes before weather events. Their tendency to stare intently at things humans cannot perceive. None of this is actually supernatural. All of it is sensory capability that exceeds the human baseline. But to people without scientific frameworks for understanding it, it looked like cats could see things humans could not. Getting associated with the supernatural is like getting associated with a major deity, an excellent strategic outcome for a small carnivore whose primary defense is being found valuable and interesting. Cats that were believed to have special powers were protected and fed. The association served the cats well. The comparison between cats and dogs clarifies what is unusual about the cat situation. Dogs have been fundamentally reshaped by their relationship with humans. The domestic dog is a different kind of creature from the wolf, not just in appearance but in cognition, in social orientation, in the deep structure of how it relates to other beings. Dogs are oriented toward humans in a way that is built into their neurology. They look to humans for guidance. They respond to human emotional states. They work for human approval in a way that is genuine and deep. Cats have not done this. The domestic cat's cognition is not fundamentally restructured around humans the way the dog's is. Cats do not look to humans for guidance. They do not respond to human distress signals in ways that suggest they have modeled the human's emotional state. They work for their own approval rather than anyone else's. And yet people prefer cats as pets at rates comparable to or exceeding dogs in many contexts. What humans are looking for in a companion animal is not always a partner who is oriented toward your needs. Sometimes what humans want is an entity whose affection, when offered, feels earned. The cat's indifference is not a bug in the relationship. It is a feature that the relationship has evolved around. The modern cat's relationship with human digital infrastructure is the latest chapter in this long story, and is in its way as remarkable as the Egyptian deification. The domestic cat has become the dominant species of the most powerful information distribution network in human history. Cats are the most shared, most viewed, most produced content category on the internet. Cat videos, cat memes, cat social media accounts with millions of followers. The volume of cat content produced and consumed by humans daily is genuinely staggering. The internet, which humans built to share information, has been substantially repurposed as a global system for distributing images of cats to other humans who will never meet those cats. The ancient Egyptians venerated cats at the level of a civilization. Modern humans have venerated cats at the level of global networked culture. The scale is different. The dynamic is identical. So did cats domesticate us? The honest answer is that the human-cat relationship does not fit neatly into the conventional categories of domestication in either direction. The cats are not domesticated in the way dogs are. The humans are not domesticated in any formal biological sense. But something happened over the past 10,000 years that resulted in 600 million cats living in human homes, receiving human care, and having evolved a suite of behavioral tools specifically adapted to eliciting that care from a species they do not need in any strict biological sense. The cats found humans useful. They moved in without being invited. They made themselves appealing through mechanisms that exploit specific vulnerabilities in human psychology. They achieved sacred status in the most powerful civilization of their era. They have maintained a global population at the center of human culture and human attention ever since. all without a breeding program, without deliberate human selection, without any of the formal mechanisms of domestication as conventionally understood. Perhaps the most impressive thing about the cat's 10,000-year strategy is this: it has managed to make human service feel like human choice. The people who care for cats believe, correctly, that they chose the relationship and continue it because they find it rewarding. They are right. The reward is real. The psychological benefits are documented and genuine, but the architecture of the reward was built by cats. Through natural selection, over thousands of years of living with humans and being selected by humans who found certain cats more rewarding to live with than others. The cat shaped the terms of the relationship. The humans just live in it. If that is not domestication running in an unexpected direction, it is something considerably more impressive. It is a 10,000-year successful invasion, conducted entirely through cuteness. And it is still working as of right now in the households of 600 million humans who bought their cats premium food this week and will do the same next week, because the cat looked at them in a certain way at a certain moment, and that was enough.